webinar brought to you by OraSure Technologies and Applicant Insight. OraSure Technologies is a global leader in oral fluid substance abuse testing products. Unique assays provide accurate and easy-to-administer testing methods to help determine the presence or absence of drugs or alcohol in a person's system. Fluid-based testing products provide a simplified collection process that results cost savings with minimal risk of tampering and dramatically reduced risk of adulteration. The Accept Oral Fluid Drug Test is an FDA-cleared laboratory-based oral fluid drug testing system that enables accurate testing for drugs of abuse including marijuana, cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, and opiates. It as the #1 recognized brand name in oral fluid testing in a 2014 National Drug Testing Industry Survey. With an easy-to-administer collection process, Intercept is ideal for workplace, criminal justice, drug treatment centers, and clinical setting screening programs, among others. Is entitled New Nicotine Testing Methods Offer Affordable Options for Employers and will be presented by Bill Current and Tom Luce. Current is the president of the Current Consulting Group, a national consulting firm that specializes in drug testing policy development and helping employers optimize their employee screening program. He is the editor of the online Ultimate Guide to State Drug Testing Laws at statedrugtestinglaws.com. He also publishes the e-newsletter State Drug Testing Laws Monthly. Mr. Current is the former executive director of the American Council for Drug Education and served as Vice President of Consulting for a national third-party administrator of drug testing and background screening services. He's author or co-author of 10 books on substance abuse issues, including Why Testing. He also administers the annual Drug Testing Industry Survey, now in its 16th year, the results of which will be presented at the SAPA conference in September. Tom is the Senior National Account Manager for Applicant Insight. An industry veteran, Tom has extensive experience working directly with employers to develop a compliant, comprehensive workforce and occupational health screening programs. Tom holds an FCRA certification through NAPBS and is a subject matter expert on drug screening programs. Insight is a CTPA, certified through the Substance Abuse Professional Administration Association. AI offers a full suite of substance abuse testing services for employers nationwide. It'll be our pleasure to hear from Bill Current and Tom Luce.
Jessica, and welcome to everybody who is on today's webinar. I'm excited to be co-presenting with Tom, and in the process I also want to just thank OraSure Technologies and Applicant Insight for teaming up together to present today's webinar on the topic of nicotine or cotinine testing. We're going to get to Tom's portion a little bit later in today's presentation, but who signed up for the webinar today, you know that we're going to be talking about the issue of nicotine testing or cotinine testing. I'm going to explain the difference between those two a little bit later. Just a couple of statistics that you may have seen in the invitation that we sent out. There are people in the United States that still smoke. Now, per capita, it's not the nation with the highest rate of smoking. There are countries where smoking is more common, but still a very common practice in states. The estimates in terms of the cost of smoking to society are in the billions of dollars. Over the last 14 years, between 2000 and 2014, the estimate as high as $193 billion, as you see on the screen, half of it through lost productivity and half of it attributable to healthcare expenditures. So there's for employers and HR executives and those who provide screening services to be aware of these services that are available, cotinine testing, and what employers can do to help decrease these costs as it affects their individual companies. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to develop a cotinine testing program. We're going to specifically talk about state laws because they are important. They do come into play. There's at least one state that prohibits testing for nicotine. And then we'll talk specifically about the advantages of oral fluid testing for cotinine, which is a metabolite of nicotine. And I in particular emphasize that point, not simply because OraSure Technologies is hosting today's webinar, but there are some trends on the legal side, nicotine and cotinine testing, that make oral fluid testing perhaps a more viable option in some circumstances, from the perspective of the Americans with Disabilities Act and what the definition of a medical exam is under the ADA. So a lot of cotinine testing is already taking place. It's a growing trend. It's usually either part of a wellness program that a corporation is sponsoring, a company do it as part of how they screen job applicants, or perhaps as a cessation program that a company may be offering to its workers. There are industries like the hospital industry as part of the healthcare industry. Smoking, nicotine or cotinine testing programs are very, very common and popular, and some very well-known hospital chains are actually now going to the policy and publicly announcing that will not hire people who are smokers. And this is a relatively new development within the nicotine cotinine testing. Not a company's doing it yet, but that's one example of how at least one employer is going in terms of trying to make sure that they have a healthy workforce where healthcare costs are contained as much as possible, doing the things that they can do, and in this case, that's zeroing on smokers. Statistics. And special slides on statistic day, a lot of information that's out there. Okay, the cost of a smoker to a private employer, so we're not talking about the federal government or state governments, but to a private sector employer, in the United States is $5,816 per year compared to the cost of a non-smoker in the same workplace. Okay, Ohio University did a study. They made it that the largest smoking-related cost, the category of cost that is highest among all the different categories that are related to smoking, is that when individuals take smoking breaks. The average worker takes 5 breaks a day compared to only 3 breaks a day for a typical non-smoker, or what are typically sanctioned work breaks. 5 a day for the smoker versus 3 for a non-smoker. And that's amounting to about an extra $3,077 a year per who smokes. The second largest category of cost is related to excess health care costs, and that's about $2,056 a year. So it's not anything right. You may have found the previous slide about the time away from work taking extra breaks somewhat surprising. You work in a workplace where smoking is prohibited in that workplace, you know that there are people who are going out and taking a smoking break. It may amount to more breaks than smokers. On, as we saw in the previous slide, about 5 per day versus 3. Probably expected to see some relative cost to health care expenses. Smokers have more health problems than non-smokers. Everything from heart and lung disease to cancers and things of that nature. But in addition to these healthcare costs, there are other costs such as increased absenteeism. So somebody who is not as healthy as another person may be prone to be absent from work more often and results in lost productivity. So 2 categories looked at separate from excess healthcare costs and taking time off for extra breaks during the day for the majority of the rest of the costs. Increased absenteeism and less productivity. But you can see that if an individual is taking more time off during the day to take smoking breaks, they may possibly be less productive than coworkers who don't smoke. Somebody who has excess health problems may be absent from work more than somebody who doesn't smoke. So smokers tend to be less healthy. They use their health care coverage more, health care coverage to go up in some cases, but also resulting in increased absenteeism and the related lost productivity from that. Often get when it comes to nicotine or cotinine testing is legal. Does the state allow it? Okay, and you look at state laws. There's only a state, South Carolina, that prohibits workplace testing for nicotine or the mud of nicotine cotinine. Just one state, South there are other laws that only apply to smokers or to testing individuals for nicotine. There are smokers' rights laws in many different states. There's also what are called lawful activities laws, which we're going to get into in the next slide, privacy laws, and then there's the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendment Act, which is, among things, sort of, there is to clarify some of the ambiguity that exists with the Americans with Disabilities Act, even after all these many years of having it. And if you're going to test individuals for nicotine or cotinine, then what if somebody tests positive? How laws affect an employer who does this type of testing and to then take perhaps some type of adverse employment action? So let's get a few examples. If South Carolina is the only state that prohibits nicotine testing, then what do the other states say then? Colorado. Now, the 3 slides, I'm going to give you an example of 3 different states. And at the top, not the blue bar, but the bold language just below the blue bar, I'm telling you what the name of the law is there, or name of that section of the law. So this section of that part of the Colorado law is the, quote, unlawful prohibition of legal activities as a condition of employment. This is a typical law activities law, and it is specifically to people who smoke, among other things. Now you might have a light bulb going off on top of your head right now when you think of Colorado, because legalized marijuana, right? So we think that also, as we talk about nicotine testing in Colorado and this lawful activities law. So to you. Number 1, it's a discriminatory or unfair employment practice for an employer to terminate the employment of any employee due to that employee's engaging in any lawful activity, and I put language, off the premises of the employer during non-working hours, unless a restriction either relates to a bona fide occupational requirement or is reasonably and rationally related to the employment activities and responsibilities of a particular employee or particular group of employees. And then B, is necessary to avoid a conflict of interest with any responsibilities to the employer or the appearance of such a conflict of interest. So some of that A, B language that you see there are applicable to the legal marijuana issue. But as we stay on the subject of smokers, the Lawful Activities Act in Colorado can be used and is being used to try to defend a smoker's right to smoke, which is a lawful activity in Colorado and throughout the United States. It office of the workplace during non-working hours. Therefore, what right does an employer have to, it says here, discriminate or take some type of employment action against that individual, which is to terminate their employment or something related to that? That's an open question. We're gonna get to that. Let's go to the next state as an example. Illinois, the law, the Right to Privacy in the Workplace Act. Part of that law, it's except as otherwise specifically provided by law, and except as provided in sections B and C, which I did not include because they weren't germane discussion. It is lawful for an employer to refuse to hire or to discharge any individual or otherwise disadvantage any individual, respect compensation, terms, conditions, or privileges of employment because the individual uses lawful products, again, off premises of the employer during non-working hours. A right to privacy in the lawful things that you do on your time away from the workplace. Now notice this one. This is a little bit different. This is actually found in the Mississippi Drug and Alcohol Testing of Employees law. So as part of the Mississippi Code that relates to labor and industry, the drug and alcohol testing portion of it contains this language. And so this is a section within Chapter 7, the requirement of abstention from use of tobacco products during non-working hours as condition of employment prohibited. So in other words, the requirement of abstinence from tobacco products during non-working hours is prohibited as a condition of employment. Here's what it says. Now, keep this is found in the drug and alcohol testing section of the Mississippi Code. It's unlawful for any public or private employer. So here it's including the public sector as well as the private sector to, as a condition of employment, that any employee or applicant for employment abstain from smoking or using tobacco products. Remember, we didn't really see specific reference to tobacco products or smoking in the two law examples that we looked at. Using tobacco products during non-working hours. Again, we've got the non-working hours. Here's the proviso. Provided that the individual complies with applicable laws or policies, and I'm policies because we're talking about a company policy, regulate smoking on the premises of the employer during working hours. So, we've just examples. On to lawful activities. One is drug testing law, one is part of a privacy law, one specifically lawful activities. These play because individuals under the law of the state's types of laws are owed to do lawful things, even if it conflicts in most cases with a company policy to the contrary, as they do it on their own time away from the workplace, as long as it's not part of working hours, or not taking place on the premises of the employer. This is because there are some other laws that conflict with this. And did additional research in preparation for today's presentation. I found a number of conflicting opinions. Other employers have the right to do this. The bottom is that employers do have the right to test nicotine or the metal breakdown of nicotine, cotinine. But what individual have some restrictions? Okay, so we've looked at 3 examples. About why to test, but then we'll come back to the examples of the various state laws and how they apply. So I said some laws that actually would be in conflict with lawful activities laws or these privacy laws that allow people to do lawful things on their own time, even if it's contrary to a company policy. Many organizations and insurance providers today offer what are premium differentials for tobacco cessation programs in the workplace. Now, that offers that. You may be somebody who works for a company that offers a smoking cessation program. These have been around. My mother, who's 84 years old, I hope she doesn't mind me letting you know that. I don't think she's listening today. She stopped smoking probably about 35 years ago. As part of her effort to stop smoking, she participated in a cessation program that was offered by her employer. A long time. Now, her heart, she hasn't smoked since that time. So she never sort of fell off the wagon, so to speak, when it came to smoking. Some people do. And for that reason, there are different ways that you either determine if somebody is absent from smoking, as they've said they would be, or in order to apply for a premium differential on their health care benefits, or maybe they're reporting that they're not doing it. But there are different ways to sort of help keep them honest. One of them is, obviously, testing for nicotine/cotinine. Now, if you're the insurance provider and you're offering a premium differential that could be as high as 20% of the total premium, to rely entirely on the honesty system, self-reporting type program. Therefore, some type of intent, be it rent testing or the initial screening test that may take place before you get approved for some type of insurance program or before you get a job with the company. That type of testing helps to verify, if you will, at the same time reward people who are honestly non-smokers, taking a pledge not to smoke, and the result, under a company policy, qualify for a premium differential in their health care plan. The differentials are becoming clear. They've been out for a long time, right? But in today's age, where an individual's privacy and their right to participate in lawful activities like smoking cigarettes or smoking marijuana, for that matter, in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon that have legalized marijuana, when those rights exist, what little ground to stand on? Well, Affordable Care Act, sometimes called the Obamacare. The Affordable Care Act actually has within it language that allows health insurance provider issuers, as it says in the underlined portion here, to different types of premiums depending on the activities and habits and behavior of the individual that they're insuring. And so offer those types of premium differentials through companies that are providing the insurance to their employees. Now, there are, as part of the Affordable Care Act, now there are some conditions that apply. Okay, if you go to the second bullet there, let me just read it, but I'm making my way to the underlined section. These rules go on to state that a health insurance issuer in a group market, so it's an individual or a small group market, impose the tobacco rating factor, that's part of the ACA, that there would be some type of rating factor associated with an individual's habit of smoking or not smoking, under Section 2701, only in connection with, and this is key, wellness program, meeting requirements under Section 2705, allow the tobacco user the opportunity to avoid paying the full amount of the tobacco rating factor participating in the wellness program, most always, depending on the tobacco rating factor, would include nicotine testing. You have individuals who can qualify for a lower premium in their health care benefit package by declaring they're a non-smoker, pledge not to smoke, and willing to, on a regular basis, through random testing for nicotine, that in fact they're not smoking. Now, these offer wellness programs that include lots of other things besides a tobacco cessation program or nicotine slackening testing. Well, programs can include lots of other things and gauge the factor of other practices that you and I may participate in that affect our health. But one is the tobacco factor and whether or not somebody qualifies for a premium differential when it comes to their insurance vis-a-vis whether or not they're smoking. Now, to come back to the whole issue of oral fluid testing. So, under the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendment Act, where we're, quote, supposedly getting some clarification on some ambiguity in the ADA. For example, what is considered a medical exam and what type of patient can an employer gain from and take action on from such a test. So to make connection to the world of drug and alcohol testing, under the ADA, a drug test is not considered to be a medical exam or part of a medical exam, but an test is, and so it's restricted to certain circumstances. It can be without some cause or reasonable suspicion. So alcohol testing in the private sector, it's mandated by, say, the Department of Transportation. You'll see alcohol testing for safe or reasonable suspicion scenarios, but not random, where there's no suspicion of alcohol use. Where drug testing, because this is not considered a medical exam, then it can for situations no suspicion of use of drugs randomly or in a pre-employment screen. Code testing, and me and that codeine is the psychoactive ingredient in cigarettes that typically causes addiction. Codeine is a metabolite of nicotine, and when codeine is present, nicotine is present. This here, as you sort of read on further in the second bullet, it's used of choice to evaluate tobacco use or exposure to tobacco as it is stable, and it is only produced, codeine is only produced when nicotine is metabolized. Codeine in somebody's sample, their oral fluid, their saliva sample, indicate perhaps that they've been using tobacco products or that perhaps they've been exposed to tobacco smoke. And that's another possibility, although at the cut rates that I'm going to share with you in a minute, sort of the whole passive in-whole argument is possible, but not a strong possibility. Now, it's important that somebody who that's positive at cotinine is not giving the employer a determinant to that individual's health. So they have nicotine or cotinine in their system, of course, but it's not giving the employer a health rating for that individual. The consequences of a positive test will company to company, depending on the policy that you put into place, relate to either a screen where the individual perhaps won't be hired, as we see with the Baylor University hospital system. We now have, said that they will not hire smokers. Or it could be the loss of a premium differential in a situation where a company has a program in place where the individual is getting a premium differential in their health care package because they've said that they're not a smoker, and yet they tested positive, so they may jeopardize that. And it could possibly lead to other adverse employment action. But testing becomes valuable or a valuable alternative to other types of testing programs because you're not asking a professional healthcare individual, a healthcare professional, to conduct a test, because oral fluid test for cotinine is relatively easy to do, and it's possible for employees to be trained to administer the test. And so you're eliminating that healthcare professional from performing the test, say a blood test, right, where you would need a certified phlebotomist perhaps to actually blood. You might have to take them to a medical facility where the blood is drawn. But with the saliva test for cotinine, you're not doing that. So it's possible, cotinine testing via saliva makes it possible to use as part of a cessation program where you're doing random testing as part of a pre-employment screening program, and probably have been subject to this just like I have, evaluation of an application for health or life insurance. I just had that take place when I had to switch my health insurance recently, where subject to that type of testing. The individual didn't draw blood when he was here. He took a sample of saliva, and we talked about the product that he used, and et cetera, et cetera. So we know cotinine is the active ingredient in cigarette causes, usually is attributable to addiction, and that cotinine is a metabolite of nicotine. And when cotinine is present, that nicotine is present as well, or the individual has been exposed to it either by smoking or by being subject to smoke or cigarette smoke around that individual. So it's talked about the images of saliva-based testing for cotinine. It's you test for cotinine with blood sample, with urine, with hair. Those are much more complex types of tests that require medical professionals or some other type of professional healthcare provider to administer the test, perhaps at an off-site laboratory. But a saliva test, because it's so easy to administer, it's conducted by a trained individual who works for your company. Now, Order is a manufacturer of lab-based cotinine tests for your serum and oral fluids, as well as instant result oral fluid tests, as you see in the last bullet there. And the number of products they offer for that, and I'm going to do a big commercial on that. But the advantages of oral fluid testing, beyond the ones that I've already said, some of the advantages, if you have a program in place or you're considering a program, is the fact that the test can be administered within just days after the individual last used tobacco. So we're talking about when it show up in that sample. It's really inexpensive, especially compared to a blood test, and the collection process is non-invasive. So just with a typical drug test, when you're collecting a sample, as opposed to asking somebody to either void a sample of urine or perhaps be subject to a blood draw, the oral collection is considered non-invasive by virtually anybody who's subject to the test. And collection is possible at a time, which eliminates the threat of specimen tampering with oral. You're going to know the results within about 15 minutes. It's going to be similar to a typical drug test when you send it to a laboratory, but you're going to have the confidence and the security of a lab-based result. But you're usually going to get a result within about 24 hours from the time the test arrives at the laboratory. And the tests are really very, the process is very easy to do. If you're in that, though, let some applicant insight know that provide you with a frequently asked question brochure that's available from OraSure, and it'll answer all of your questions. I'm going to anticipate a few of your questions right now as it applies generally to oral fluid cotinine testing. Okay, so we talked about cotinine is a metabolite, first-stage metabolite of nicotine. The window of detection for nicotine is relatively short, usually just a couple of hours. But cotinine, you extend that window of detection for days, several days, in fact. That makes it a preferred method for testing for tobacco. And off level is about 30 grams per milliliter. And as you look at various products that you can use to test saliva or oral fluid for cotinine, you want those questions. Specifically, what's the cutoff level with your product? Because that's to play in terms of determining the accuracy of detecting the cotinine within that sample. Now, a couple things here that apply generally speaking, but also specifically to the Sure device. If you collect a sample, send it to a laboratory, you're going to be about 24 hours, but the collection process itself just takes minutes to do. So individuals often for a relatively short period of time, back at their desk, back on the assembly line, whatever it is, and they're back at work. So the lost productivity is significantly if you're collecting an oral fluid sample for drawing blood or sending an individual to an off-site facility to draw blood or to collect a urine sample. Very invasion and invasion into the workday with oral fluid. Now, there are two different types of products that are available here that we're talking. One is the lab-based one, and then one is the instant result one. You can use one depending on the circumstances. This is a picture of the instant result cotinine test that's available. This takes longer time to result, right? Because the other one, it's just a couple of minutes to collect the sample. Here we're talking about collecting the sample and then waiting just more to get the result. You're going to know the result within about 10 minutes using the instant cotinine testing device that you see on the screen here. The Winston 2-day shelf life with the product is 24 months from the date of manufacture. And then the laboratory, as you can see with the instant, 99% specificity, 98% sensitivity. It's very, very similar. So with cotinine testing with oral fluid, you have the choice between a lab test and instant test, but you can do either one in oral fluid as the specimen. Now, I have a lot of information with you that's, kind of out there. You can find it, I can find it, and it's interesting. Hopefully it's been helpful to you. There's nothing like people who are around doing this for a living day in and day out. So I talked a little bit yesterday of some of what he's observed. And so now I'm going to bring Tom Luce into the picture here, and he'll tell us a little bit about their experience with applicant insight, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. So Tom, welcome to the webinar.
Oh, good evening, everybody. I'm Tom Luce, and I'm with Applicant Insight. I've been with the company for about 13 years, and I've been helping companies manage drug testing programs nationally. When I first started in the industry, urine drug screen testing seemed the norm with everybody, and not anybody did. But as time went on, I found where urine drug screen testing wasn't always necessarily the easiest policy for them to administer or manage. An example would that be when I have clients run random testing programs. People, the HR people I dealt with, didn't realize that how much time it was spending sending somebody out to do a test, and that time turned into money and lost production. There's no issues doing random drug testing off-site where maybe only be able to handle so many people at a time, and if you put too many people down there, they can spend hours sometimes when you do a random drug test. So companies started looking for ways how to manage that process better, and when I would present them with the oral fluid testing system, it fit their needs. It kept the person in the office, they didn't have to leave the premises, and it saved them a lot of time in running their random programs through their company. And it saved them a lot of money. At first, they were a little worried about doing the oral fluid testing, but once they started doing it, they found it was really a very simple process to administer and get the results back on. And it made it easy for them to do that. And so when I have clients have people working non-traditional hours, whether they're working second and third shift, where it was very hard to administer the urine drug testing programs by sending people out. And the oral fluid solution really fit that need also. And as time goes by, bills put out, we're seeing this nicotine testing coming up. I have a lot of clients that are looking to put a nicotine program into place, whether it be for their insurance, whatever policy they have, and now how do I manage that policy and how do I keep going? And the oral fluid solution really seems to be working best for them in that direction because once again, if they need to do a random program, they just have people in their office administer the test and sit right there without having to send people out. I've just found that it really works well for the right client. And that's finding in the industry right now. Sure, there are places where urine does work, but the oral fluid testing I found is a very viable solution, and I think it's going to really work if you're putting a nicotine program into place for your company.
Now, I'll ask you a couple of questions. That's interesting. So you've seen this kind of evolution, if you will, from sort of the traditional testing methods that typically involve urine to oral fluid. And of course, not everybody obviously is switching to oral fluid. So, well, for some companies, and you see that sort of migration toward oral fluid testing. Now, nicotine testing is becoming more of a trend, and when option, oral fluid testing makes sense in certain ways. But here's my question. So we have 30 years of history on the drug testing side of the issue. The federal regulations have been in place, and up till now they've only allowed urine testing, though we know that lab-based oral fluid testing regulations are in the works and will soon be announced. But with nicotine testing, see companies very open to alternative specimen testing, what we refer to as an alternative in the drug testing world, because they don't have any experience testing, and so they're more apt to consider something like oral fluid?
People are becoming more apt to going with the oral fluid testing methods. The methods that are out today are really very simple to do the test, and once you basically give them a demonstration of how the process works, they become pretty comfortable with it pretty quickly. And that's out there.
Okay. The other question, something that you mentioned a couple of times, is just what I probably would just sort of lump under the category of lost productivity. So if you're sending an individual to an off-site collection site, there's time away from the so they're doing what you're paying them to do. They're away from the work, and I guess to be away from the work site for an hour to provide a sample. Would that be reasonable, or sort of an hour?
Say an hour is definitely within reason, and I've seen much longer than an hour at times, depending upon where they're located and the size of the collection site that they're dealing with. Anyone here has ever gone to a Quest or a LabCorp to get a blood draw done? I know I have. Sat there sometimes an hour and a half having to wait to get my blood draw done from my doctor's requirement. And you can go to the same trap if you're going in for a urine drug screen collection at that point in time. That's not, the hour would definitely be in the realm.
Yeah, so they're away from the site. They're not actually doing, quote unquote, what they're paid to be doing, but they're doing something the employer wants them to do. How long does that come up, in the world of drug testing or nicotine testing, where, an employer's, do they specifically say, Tom, if there was some way to sort of cut on the time that it takes to do this test, we would be interested in knowing how to do that?
Say time is always a factor when it comes to people at their jobs. Like you pointed out how much time is lost from just cigarette breaks alone. Well, the same thing works here, is how much time am I losing? If I'm administering a random drug testing program and I'm going to have 3 people that are in my random pool, how much am I going to lose by sending people out to a clinic for at a clip? Well, that's 30 hours of lost production right there, just on one random pool. A lot of people argue the HR department is getting a little grief from the production department because they're losing too much time with their people.
Yeah.
So they have to balance that within their company.
And the other question that came to mind was, do you run into situations where there's perhaps a think that it's not legal test for nicotine, that some do that in their state? Does that misconception exist out there?
That is always out there. That goes true for even a lot of random testing that's out there for any type of drug testing. But if you present them with the proper education on what is allowable by law and why you're running the program, it meets all those needs. Like you say, for the Affordable Health Care Act, there's provisions in there now that will allow them to have these different rates for their premiums for their policies. And how are you going to maintain or enforce that then with the company? A little hesitation, but I think with proper education, though, people see that there is value in putting these programs into place.
You can tell you from going through the open enrollment period at the beginning of the year when we signed up with the new healthcare provider that I would let me put it this way: I'd hate to think what my premiums would be if I was a smoker. They seem high enough, so it would seem in this day and age a lot of people would be incentivized to perhaps stop smoking or remain abstinent from smoking if there was some type of premium differential available to them. And I suppose as you deal with employers, those issues probably will come up or will continue to come up over the course of time. Anything else, Tom, on your end?
I think we've covered basically what I have.
Okay.
Thank you for your time, Bill.
Absolutely. We're pretty close to the end here, so let me just kind of conclude with a few basic points. And before I just want to invite anybody on today's webinar presentation. And this webinar is being recorded, so if you'd like more information, you can either come back and re-listen to this, but I'd also like to invite you to just send us questions. If you have a question about a specific state law and the Lawful Activities Act of that law, or if you've heard that nicotine tests not allowed in this state or that state, we only mentioned South Carolina, well, we can provide some good, accurate information for you. In conclusion, we know that smoking is bad for you. From a health perspective, it's not good, and there's a high price tag, not only from the mortality side of things, but in terms of doses as well. It has a direct impact on the workplace. There's no question about it. Just the cost of having individuals take extra breaks during the day is significant, and productivity that's associated with that. Well, that there's only one state that specifically prohibits testing for nicotine. That's South Carolina. All states do not prohibit it, but all states have some type of law in place that may protect the smokers or the rights of an individual to be a smoker. So you have to be aware of those smoker rights laws. You have to be aware of the lawful activities law, privacy laws that may exist in your state that spill and relate to smoking or to smoker rights. But you all know what the Affordable Care Act says about smoking, about premium differentials, about advising people to have healthy living habits that can, in cases, depends on the insurance issuer, translate into lower premiums for health care coverage. But do notice that there's only one state that prohibits nicotine testing, that's South Carolina. Codeine is perhaps the most accurate way to determine whether somebody actually has been smoking or has been exposed to a lot of smoke, cigarette smoke, because it's a metabolite, a first-stage metabolite of nicotine, and it means present. If somebody's positive for codeine, with the OSHA product, the cutoff level is 30 nanograms per milliliter. And detection for codeine is a period of days rather than just hours. If they test positive for codeine, they have nicotine in their system. No question about that. And it becomes a way to keep people honest. If say they're not a smoker and they're getting some type of financial benefit from that declaration, then random testing individual honest. And they're going to benefit from it. Your company line is going to benefit from it as well. It's a highly effective method for detecting whether somebody has been smoking or been subject to smoking, even if it doesn't tell you specifically the health issue involved. As I mentioned, the ACA, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, whatever you want to call it, does provide those incentives. They're built into the federal law. And so, well, maybe some restrictions at the state level in terms of what you can do from an adverse employment action based on these lawful activity away from the workplace on time. There's a law outside of South Carolina that would prevent you from being able to test that individual. But it's important for every company or every provider of this service to employers to understand these law activities laws say, and we're about that from the legalized marijuana standpoint as well, right? But they say, know that they do apply to smoking, to nicotine, and then develop your policy accordingly. Because you may have a program in place that is in line with the Affordable Care Act, you will still require with the state laws that apply to you. So we're at the conclusion of today's presentation. I want to again thank Orser Technologies for their monthly webinar series, and Insight for teaming up with Orser this month to bring you this presentation on cotinine testing and oral fluid cotinine testing specifically. And thanks to my co-presenter, Tom Luce, from Applicant Insight. And with that, I'll turn the virtual microphone back over to Jessica.
Thank you, Tom. On behalf of Orser Technologies and Applicant Insight, we hope that you have found today's presentation informative and helpful. This presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions informing you how to access the recording. Thank you for your attendance today. This concludes today's webinar.